Hi and welcome back to the Guitarist Guru series, and we'll be looking at today a continuation of your chord playing and your open chords, but this time we're going to be looking at what we call the dominant chords, the seventh chords. Now these chords are, if you like your blues, then these are the chords for you, and you'll find a lot of blues music would have used, or still does, use what we call the seventh of a dominant chord. Now why it's called a dominant, that gets into the more kind of technical elements that we'll move into in a later stage. But these chords themselves, actually, from a playability point of view, probably are slightly easier than some of the other open chords that we've looked at already, because actually they use less fingers. Not all of them, but a couple do. So the sound, what we're going to be looking at today is we'll be looking at the E7 chord. A7, the D7, the B7. Now the B7, I warn you now, is probably your hardest chord to learn today because it involves all four fingers. Okay. And the C7, again, this involves four fingers, but we've already played the C, so hopefully that should help you a little bit on that one. And then a G7. Okay. Now, just to give you an example of how these chords work together, I'm just going to play a little chord sequence, and one thing that will become a bit more familiar with yourselves, if you're not familiar already, is what we call the 12 bar blues, or a 3 chord trick, or another way they call it the 1, 4 and 5. Again, that comes more technical. We'll move into that at a later stage. Okay, so this is your 12 bar blues chord sequence using those seventh chords, just using E7, A7 and B7. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, down to the A7 for 2 bars, 2, back to the E7, 9, B7, A7, E7, last bar, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that is a standard 12 bar blues chord sequence. And a lot of blues music just repeats that chord sequence over and over again. Now obviously that's a little bit staged at the moment, it's just kind of a single strum pattern, but obviously the more you get used to the chord changes, the more you can get used to your right hand rhythms as well. And again, we'll look at that further on through the course. So let's have a look at these chords in a little bit more detail. Right then, so let's start off with our E7 chord. E7 chord is very much like our E major chord, where we had our first finger on the first fret of the G, my second finger on the A string at the second fret. Now, when we played an E major chord, we just add that third finger down underneath. We don't need that for the E7, it's literally just the 2 fingers. Alright? And that is your E7, E dominant 7 chord. Okay. Next one we're going to look at is the A7. So remember beforehand we had, when we played an A major, we went 1, 2 and 3, i.e. the first finger was on the D string at the second fret, and then followed down underneath. So for this one, first finger stays again on the second fret of the D string, but then my third finger, I tend to use my third finger instead of my second, because that to me feels more comfortable than when I play an A chord, I'm using 3 fingers. When I don't need that finger, I'm just going to take that one off, and that produces the A7. So literally it is the first finger there on the second fret of the D, and then the third finger is on the second fret of the B. And then all you do is you strum, again, like the A chord, you strum from the A string. Okay, you could hear there was a slightly muted note there because I had my finger caught underneath there. So you just need to make sure you've got a bit of clearance takes a bit of practice as well. So even us professionals sometimes get a little bit caught and we don't think about what we're doing. So let's moving on. So we've got E7, you've got A7. The next chord is the D7. Now when we played a D major chord, remember it was like the triangle turned on its side pointing this way. Well, this is the opposite to that, because our first finger goes on the B string at the first fret, second finger goes on the G at the second fret, and then the third one goes on the high E at the second fret. So if you notice now, the triangle is now pointing the other way. That's the dot to dot shape, if you remember I talked about that before. And from here you play just from the D string again, because that is our root note. And that's the sound that you get. Alright? Okay. So you've got E7, A7 and D7. Now comes the fun one. The one that you'll probably be cursing for a while until you get your fingers comfortable with this one. This is the B7. Now, if I put my first finger on the first fret of my D string, because that's where we start, okay, my second finger goes on the second fret of the A string. Now, this note here is actually quite important because this is the root note, i.e. that note there, in the second fret is the B. Okay, so that is my root note. So that's where we start our strumming pattern from. We don't play the bass E string on this one either. Right? So those two fingers are there. Then the third finger is on the G at the second fret. And then our little pinky comes into play here. So we're going to go right onto the high E at the second fret, right underneath there. Now, this one's tricky because you need to make sure that little finger and that third finger isn't touching that open B string. To be honest, you might find it is at the moment, and if you get a bit of connection with your finger to that string, you might get that sound. Do you know what? I really wouldn't worry too much about this, because this is something that once your fingers have got a little bit harder and they've toughened up a little, and you'll find in your fingers and your technique becomes much better, it will naturally, your hand will naturally arch over and your fingers will go on tiptoes and avoid that B string. But you just got to persevere with it as well. You notice my thumb's quite high on here as well. It's just comfortable for me to do that. Right, a lot of people say about the thumb, and the thumb's really important, it must be in a certain place behind the guitar. To be honest, the rule book goes out the window. You have to at least try and get your fingers to a point where they feel comfortable and they can play the strings without sounding too fret buzzy. All right, so you just go where you feel comfortable. You'll find if your thumb's not there and your thumb's here, that's not comfortable. All right, that shouldn't be there. So it's got to be somewhere around here just to feel comfortable. Right, so you play those three, the B7 together. So starting from the A string. Okay. If you want to just make sure, do you want to check your strings, just pick through the strings just to see if they're all clear of each other. Alright. So that's your B7. Okay, and then the next chord is a C7. So we've obviously played the C in the past. But this time we add the little finger on to the third fret of our G string. So, and that adds that kind of bluesier sound to the chord. So the normal C, and C7. And then our final dominant chord for this session is the G7. Now this one's a stretchy one. You've got to cover from high string to low string over 3 frets. All right. So first finger goes on the high E at the first fret. Second finger goes onto the second fret of my A string. And then my third finger goes on the third fret of my low E. Now, there is a bit of a stretch going on here. So the idea is Okay, fine. Now if you notice my thumb now is right back here. Okay. Now for me, it has to be, because my fingers won't stretch that far unless my thumb's this low. If I'm up here, you can hear those strings are pulling and they're touching each other. So you just need to... Okay, so as before, you can put those chords together. Maybe have a look at what I mentioned about the 12-bar blues sequence as well. We will have a whole session on 12-bar blues and how it kind of goes together on a later session. But again, you have another 6 chords to add to your chord armoury now. And these are all classed as open chords, except these ones will be shown with a little 7 by the side of it. And that, every time you see a chord that's got a 7 by the side of it, just on its own, means it's called a dominant chord, and is used quite a lot in blues guitar playing as well. Alright, so enjoy and good luck with that, and I'll be back with some more chords at a later date.